Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're doing this as a Facebook Live event a week before the actual full moon that's coming up next week, and then we'll be publishing it with our newsletter, so you might be seeing the recording. I don't know. You might be seeing this live. We are going to be talking about the full moon chart that's coming up at the end of this month on the 28th of January. And that is a pretty much of a doozy as they have been lately. All the lunations have been really pretty dramatic, and we've been seeing dramatic events, so it makes sense, doesn't it, that it all lines up like that. Not only do we see dramatic events, but I think we're seeing a kind of a dramatic turning. We were hoping, when I say we, I mean astrologers generally, have been hoping that this new great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at 0 degrees of Aquarius would actually kind of be a ray of light in the darkness. We were careful, I've been careful to say we still have a lot of Pluto to go. There's a very dramatically emphasized Pluto in this current lunation cycle, as I think you're all aware. And that does imply trials, tests, letting go. They say Pluto is all about bringing to the surface those behaviors that are not necessarily the ones you want, having a chance to look them over, having a chance to maybe dramatically or maybe not, depending on how things have been going for you. You've been doing your spiritual homework. You have to find what needs to change. Where is the as they've been saying about the U.S. government, where is the rot that has to be excised? A certain amount of things build up over time. Bad practices, corruption, one kind or another, and you do have to kind of have fresh starts every now and again. And this particular one with Jupiter and Saturn at the 0 degree mark of Aquarius, which we had just at the last solstice on December 21st of 2020, is such a ray of light that we may be able to kind of get through this. And of course, it's very encouraging to see the Biden administration kind of digging in. They're rolling out the vaccine plan, the plan to get the distribution going amongst the states in a little bit more organized fashion. It's going to take some resources. They have a move to put resources, the $1.9 trillion relief package that they want to try to apply to this, and maybe that will be a turning point in some of the COVID situation, although we still have months of this COVID time to really go through, and we'll still be wearing masks and we'll still be social distancing, because they're hoping that perhaps by September they may get 75 to 85% of the country, this country, in which case we can get a little bit back to normal. We're not going to be completely back to normal even then, and it won't be for months. So we do have that to go through, and we do have kind of the aftermath of certain situations, such as the violent storming of the Capitol that happened on January 6th. That was such a kind of watershed event, just as Mars entered Taurus, actually there to conjunct Uranus. And let's look at some of the charts, because I want to show a couple of charts, and I think you'll be interested to see them. So we can look at the chart right now for the full moon, and here it is coming up on the 28th at 11 in the morning on the west coast, and it would be 3 hours later on the east coast, even later than that, afternoon to evening in Europe, or further east it's going to be later in the day. And what's interesting, so interesting, always so interesting these days, about this full moon is not only is the sun at 9 degrees of Aquarius, but by George, so is Jupiter. This is a partile conjunction, and Saturn is nearby, less than 4 degrees away. Also, we have in a partile conjunction Venus and Pluto, as if we didn't need to emphasize Pluto any further than it already has been emphasized. And it's really quite interesting to see, as we have been for so long, the opposition between Eris and Haumea starting to come back into alignment, because Haumea is moving retrograde now, and Eris is moving forward, but it doesn't move very fast. But I want to show you in a minute or two a little bit further into the year, because we want to take a look at how this is going to be affecting the whole configuration of Pluto in Capricorn, which stays there through this first half of the year at least. But the interesting thing, I believe, with this particular full moon is, look, we have this huge T-square between Sun and Moon, bolstered by Saturn and Jupiter, by George, Uranus. Uranus and Mars. Now, Uranus and Mars are not as close together. They were actually completely together on Inauguration Day, as it turns out. But, and that was a question mark. You know, I know there was this kind of, the question was asked before Inauguration Day. Somebody said, what do you think about Mars and Uranus? Well, that was a question was asked earlier, actually. But basically Mars and Uranus can be accidents. You know, it's kind of things happen by surprise, and they have an action orientation to them. You don't know where the thing is going. You don't know where the action is heading. And of course, it turned out very nice on Inauguration Day. I think pretty much everybody can recognize that it was a very peaceful ceremony. It was a ceremony calling for unity. All of the people there were in kind of a good place to say, let's start over. Let's start with a new administration and a new dawning in the America of 2021, and let's see how we can do. You know, let's see if we can pull things together. And of course, Biden is making, I think, a very nice statement of, I am not the president of just the people that voted for me. I'm the president of America and all Americans, whether you voted for me or you didn't vote for me. I want to help you. I want to try to get things straightened out. And he does talk very specifically about income inequality, which I think is a very good thing to talk about. He does talk very specifically about climate change, which I think is a very good thing to talk about. And he talks about, of course, the pandemic and getting vaccines to people, and also the social distancing to try to keep the curve, as they call it, flattened somewhat as we go through these difficult remaining months before the vaccine is widely enough distributed. So there's a lot of challenges on the plate. And I think that's reflected a bit in, we do have a pretty strong, you know, the new moon that came along on the 12th of January before the inauguration was conjunct to Pluto. So Pluto has been just so prominent all year, last year, and then even the beginning of this year, and I want to get into that a little bit later on too. But one thing I do want to mention before I forget and before we get past it is this kind of it's a few degrees off right now, about 4 degrees off, but they're moving toward each other because Haumea is moving backwards. And Haumea is a new planet. It's hard to know exactly what it means, but it does seem to have to do with a profound connection to nature and to natural law. And you can kind of spot it in certain people that have this kind of fundamental basis of tuning into what's right. In other words, there's such a thing as right relationship. There's such a thing as right action. And, you know, Eris is all about finding your principles and acting upon them, and acting upon what your deepest desires are. But you have to be careful. You want to be in response to what makes sense. And what is the absolute, you know, how can you say there's any absolute truth? But yet there is. I mean, you can have different beliefs, and everybody's entitled to their beliefs. But it turns out some beliefs have health consequences different from other beliefs. If you have a belief that you don't need to wear a mask, well, that seems to have a health consequence because of the transmission of the virus, and so on. So you have to kind of be tuned in not only to what you feel at your heart, and then of course that's liberty to be able to do your thing, but then also what is the natural law, what is the right relationship, right action, taking care of people, not letting people die and suffer, not letting people starve, not letting people be what they call food insecure. These are very important, you know, and I think we're moving in the right direction towards maybe addressing some of these things. And so seeing this alignment between Eris and Haumea in the sky, making a T-square to Saturn and Pluto, that was that last summer, all last summer and fall. And now we're seeing it begin to reassert itself again. But, you know, what we want to see in this particular configuration is also the T-square between Sun, Jupiter, opposite the Moon, to Uranus and Mars, and their midpoint, which is 843, which is what's rising. So actual West Coast rising point at the time of 11:16 a.m. at the time of the full moon, uh, like I say, only on the West Coast, but still, it really is at this midpoint. You can see 6, 8, 10. This is right at the midpoint of Uranus and Mars, bringing it back a little bit into focus at the timing of this full moon. So there is a bit of a question mark there on surprise events, surprise actions. Nobody knows exactly what to expect. They say with Uranus, expect the unexpected. And we saw that also in the inauguration day. Let me show you that chart. I'm going to be flipping around to a bunch of charts here just briefly. But here's the inauguration day chart. So this is a chart set for Washington, D.C. And it is a chart where, at this point, the sun was at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So this echoes the December 21st conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at that degree. And then, of course, Saturn had moved beyond that 0 degree mark to 3. Jupiter had moved beyond that 0 degree mark to 7. And we have this little stellium of planets here in Aquarius: Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury. Mercury further in at 18 degrees of Aquarius. We have, interestingly, the moon exactly at 29 degrees when the 12 o'clock hour struck, which was the inauguration moment. That was when Biden was officially the new president. The 29 degree mark of the moon was opposite to Haumea, which is interesting. And we did have Mars and Uranus exactly at the same degree. 6 degrees 40 minutes, 6 degrees 44 minutes. There was some concern. A lot of astrologers were thinking, gee, what might happen? And of course, they were concerned about some violent act. And there were troops. Mars also rules military, right? There were troops. There were 25,000 troops. So it was an armed camp with razor wire fences everywhere, and a very beautiful display of flags of all nations, and a very beautiful display of 400 lights in the dusk that preceded the inauguration, and that was for the 400,000 dead in the pandemic. So there's a lot of symbolism right now, and a lot of kind of hope for the future, and maybe hope to rectify some of the situations that have gone not so great with the pandemic in 2020, which we're glad to see a change, something happening new again. So it's interesting to me that Mars and Uranus were right together at the inauguration point, and now at this full moon, they are also emphasized. Another thing that I'd like to bring forward about the inauguration is I was very struck. I think probably most people that heard her voice, I'm talking about Amanda Gorman, that young poet, were also very struck by the beauty of her words, the kind of sensibleness of her words, and also the passion of her words in terms of equality and justice. She was articulating an idea that it was time for the balance to take place, that income inequality was not a good thing, that it had to be adjusted. She referred to what just isn't always justice. Things like that. She had a very good use of her words, and I thought they were very passionate in their kind of the way she presented a hope for the future. It was clear-eyed. She said we did come through some things, and we did have democracy delayed, and she said democracy can be delayed but not permanently delayed. So she said some good things, and we have, as a result of Leslie Benson bringing it forward this morning as we were preparing for this, she said we have the data. We don't have the time, but we have the date. So let's look at Amanda Gorman. And her chart is right here, March 7th, 1998 is what we know. We don't know her time. But without knowing her time, it's still quite interesting because, take a look at some of these configurations. She has Eris with Saturn, 18 degrees, partile conjunction. Eris with Saturn is defending the underdog. Eris with Saturn is seeing the high side of what society can become as represented by Capricorn, Saturn. On its good basis, it is an ability to see where society can evolve in a positive way, where it can get to. And certainly she articulated that in her presentation. So I think that's very, very clear, very interesting. Also Chiron at 18 degrees, an inconjunct or a quincunx to this position of the Eris and the Saturn. Now those things wouldn't change with the time, of course. Interestingly, she has this very optimistic positive, fantasy notion, a very beautiful configuration of Neptune and Venus together, 1 degree apart, at 1 degree of Aquarius and 2 degrees of Aquarius, and that's where the 0 degree Aquarius sun was right there that day, on the day of the inauguration, and that is also where the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of the 21st was at 0 degrees. So this is a great lineup here, just kind of indicating what you can do with astrology, what certain things can show up, and she does have also the Mars, with that sextile, a strong sextile to the Venus. In other words, she takes action with it. She's not just kind of walking around in a fuzzy dream world of loveliness, but she's actually kind of got some action orientation that goes along with that. And to back that up, she has also Maki Maki at 13 degrees of Virgo, opposite her 16-degree Pisces sun. So there's very interesting, and of course, Haumea is in there too, right action, right relationship, connection to nature. She has that in trine with this lovely Neptune Venus. So just saying. She also has Uranus, by the way, at 10, and that's very interesting because at the time of the inauguration day, it's actually more of the full moon that was following, but 10 degrees of Aquarius is a square to that position in the full moon chart. That is the Mars position of this full moon that kind of caps this month, that she was so much of a part of. I'd like to show you one chart looking ahead into the future a little bit, and that is a chart from March. So here's the full moon of March, so that's 60 days away from here. And what's happening is, it's hardly moved, but the fact that Haumea is moving backwards, and we have now 26 degrees of the Pluto, we have 23, almost 24 degrees of the, it turns out the midpoint of Eris and Haumea is getting closer and closer to 26. It's in this configuration, it is 26 degrees, and then further on 26.5 degrees we have Pluto, and then further on in the USA chart we have 27.5 degrees, which is the natal position of Pluto. So this is within a degree of the natal position of Pluto, which is significant also because in the USA chart we must recognize the fact that the United States is having its Pluto return is very significant. It's happening now and over the next little while. So take a gander at that chart just for a minute, and I'm going to move because I'm going to have to plug in my computer just a second. So I apologize for that little pause. I think it's interesting to look at this chart, which is the full moon chart for 2 months from now in March, just to see how things line up. This will be a time when the full moon actually lines up with this Chiron and Haumea axis in opposition. So that's indication of something. That will be pretty strong. It'll be something to really recognize when we get closer to that we are kind of gathering the wounded situations of the past and taking an activist stance, which is Maki Maki, towards recognizing it, acting upon it. We have actually a triple conjunction at 8 degrees between Sun, Chiron, and Venus. So this is something to look ahead to. I think it'll be quite a powerful configuration when it happens. Uranus is also at 8 degrees, so that will be quite interesting as well when that does take place. But just to look ahead a little bit, so the main point I'm wanting to make, also the fact that Pluto is actually stationing. If we put the mouse on it and right-click on it using the right mouse button or the control mouse button in a Mac, one button, you do find the next station of this planet is actually 26 degrees 40. It takes place with the positioning at 26 degrees 48 minutes. And it's coming up in a month, another month. So these kind of spring months are very interesting when we have also Saturn in square with Uranus, and they will be kind of doing this dance where they stay in square with each other when they retrograde, and they're going to be around this 11 and 12 degree mark for a while. So this is pretty intense timing. And the fact that Pluto is also stationing, as I say, less than a degree away from the US Pluto. So this is coming up, the timing of the next few months is not easy times. It's going to be a hard time, a difficult time. And it's just something to be able to recognize that is what we're dealing with and just what we have to be aware of. So going back to the actual full moon, the actual month that we're in, coming up next week on Thursday, it's pretty intense. There could be some surprises. We have the T-square to the position of Mars more directly, but it is also combined with Uranus. There could be unexpected events as we head out of the first month into the second month of the new year. And we are going to be seeing, as we all know from current events, we are going to be seeing changes. We are going to be seeing new ways of doing things because of the Democrats coming in, different approaches. There may be contention. There may be, we have a country that's somewhat divided that we have to hopefully include everybody and include all the different points of view and come to some kind of consensus on things. One of the most important things is to recognize, and I'm not being partisan when I say this, that the election results were the election results. I mean, it's not the case that there could have been some hidden fraud. There were 60 lawsuits that were turned away by the courts for lack of evidence, and it was mostly just Trump insisting that there was some problem with the election because he didn't want to leave town. That was what was going on there. And so for the Republicans in general that have been somewhat saying, maybe this is the case, maybe he's got a point here, to just admit that was a deceit, that was a lie. And I think it's very important to recognize that was, you can't just get away with saying any old thing. You can't just get away with saying, maybe it's just as good not wearing a mask as it is wearing a mask. It's not true. It's a scientific fact that you can slow the transmission with the mask and with social distancing. And it's another scientific fact that the election results were carefully reviewed by all the different election boards of the 50 states, and they were all certified by all the 50 states. And there were observers, and there was recounts in some cases, like Georgia. There was a hand recount of what the machine total was, and the same ballots were hand counted. They have all the ballots right there to look at. You can see all these ballots. And the hand count came out exactly as the machine count. So, there's just been allegations that are not necessarily true ones. And it's important to recognize where the truth actually is. Now, you can have your opinion about policy, which is the better policy, how was the best way to go forward in various different directions. Maybe we shouldn't borrow more money at this time and increase the national debt. But maybe we should because the economy needs, most people seem to think the economy needs a stimulus, and that will be really helpful to get also the vaccine distribution going, to get the states taken care of in their economic situation, to help people that are desperately in need of another check, the $2,000 check instead of the $600 check. Anyway, all these things, they can be debated. But it's very important to recognize that there are some things that are just fundamentally true, and there are certain factors of science, such as climate change, has to be addressed. That's another lie, that climate change doesn't need to be addressed. That's a lie. There's another lie that the election was stolen. That's a lie. Kids in cages is another one that I happen to feel. There's not a question mark about what happened there. People know what happened. They were separated, young children. It's not approved treatment as far as the way the world looks at that, and I think that's appropriate. I don't think that's an appropriate way to deal with things with kids. No matter what you might think about immigration and the border, that particular policy was not okay. Not in accordance with what I consider to be just the right principles of human relationships, how people deal with each other. So if we can just accept a few things as a groundwork and go on from there, I think we will come out of this. And people say, what does the astrology tell you? Well, how are we going to do? How's the pandemic going to come out? How are things going to happen? What's What's the time we'll get back to normal? All these things. And really, the astrology is not the astrology indicates where we're at, what the challenges are. But remember, it's up to each individual person. It's up to all of us. It's up to our actions. Each one of us, our actions count. They add to the situation. The vibrations go out, and it helps people recognize where they need to get to. And it also, each action counts. It's like drops of water make a mighty ocean. So I think it's important to recognize our power, to recognize how much power each individual has, which is in accordance with some of these new planets, like Eris coming along and saying, you have to be paying attention to what's going on inside you, what your principles are. You have to act from those principles, and just do it. You know, we're in a tough situation, and we just have to work at it. We just have to get ourselves out of it. So I think that's the fundamental message at this point. We transition back. So that's what I have to say to you. I don't know if there is any question. Maybe Leslie would let me know about that, if we do have any.
No questions so far.
Well, you know, I think it's good timing just to say what I said, to leave that as what we can say at the moment about where we're at, and really, it's in the working out. You know, it's in the mix of the cooking that's being done. You know, we're all the chefs making the platter, and we have to do the best we can, and each one of us counts, and it's a great benefit to recognize that we all count, that our words make a difference, our actions make a difference. Do the best we can, and maybe we'll get there. So best of luck with all that, and talk to you soon. Take care.